Most financial conversations get divided into two buckets, the business side and the personal side. Different advisors, different meetings, different language. And today we're going to talk about why that divide is one of the most expensive assumptions a business owner can make and what it looks like when someone finally brings it all together. I'm Matt Pappas, CEO of Cottonwood Wealth Strategies. I'm joined today with my father and our firm's president, Tom Pappas. Welcome to Pocket Pundits. So, Dad, I want to start somewhere personal. You've spent your career sitting across from business owners at some of the most consequential moments in their financial lives. What's the thing you see consistently that most of them didn't anticipate when they walked in?
Yeah, good question. I think a couple topics, right? I think one thing is they don't realize how interconnected everything is. They feel sometimes that the business and the personal side are different silos, but really they're one and the same. Essentially, in most cases, their business is their financial plan, not realizing that one doesn't exist without the other. For example, cash flow needs in the business, that flows over to the personal side. Tax implications. And we've had situations, for example, the business owner hasn't thought enough about the personal side, and it made sense to set up a family limited partnership to own some of the real estate that the business exists in. So a lot of things like that are gaps that most business owners don't realize.
Yeah, it's something I think about from the CEO side is how easy it is to compartmentalize, right? To treat the business decisions and the family decisions like they live in different rooms. Digging into that more, do you think that's by design, or do people just not have anyone really helping them connect those rooms?
I think it's the latter. I think that they really haven't had an opportunity to sit down with an advisor that understands what the options are and how important that is, that you have to incorporate the business with the personal. Because again, one doesn't exist without the other, obviously. And some of those business decisions can have significant effects on the long-term aspect of your personal financial plan and your family aspects as part of that too. So,
and one thing I think one thing I think that doesn't get talked about enough is it's just how isolating it can be or lonely it can be to run a business when you're at a certain level. You have decisions that affect your employees, you have decisions that affect your family, also your personal net worth, and they're all happening at the same time. And I think most owners are making those decisions with advisors, who only see one piece of it. So, Dad, for you, what does that actually look like when someone sits down with you?
yeah, so I think the pattern we see most often is that the owner is the business. Their relationships are the relationships. Their judgment is the operating system. And at some point, whether they're planning for it or not, that has to change. So the question is, are they planning for it now, or they wait for it to kind of happen so that hopefully that it works out? Sometimes it's hard for business owners to start delegating, right? Whether it's ridding themselves of the day-to-day burdens so that they can focus more on what they're good at and consequently what's best for the business.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, to add to that, we see a lot of true owner operators where they've been the person that's set up the business and grown the business, and they're wearing all the hats, and they had to get the business to a certain level, and that's totally understandable. But I think to your point, as the business grows and evolves, ideally, if you're the owner, you want to see that business thrive into perpetuity or as long as possible, regardless of whether you're directly at the helm and running all those different pieces. And it's hard for owners that I've seen to sort of let that go. It's a really difficult decision, understandably so. But bringing that over to the portfolio side of things, which is our world, we always advise to be diversified, put your assets in different buckets, so you're mitigating the risk if something bad happens in the market in one particular sector. And I think the same concept applies to the business side of things. That's a very concentrated piece of your financial strategy. And so over time, the thought process should be, how do I strategically start to diversify it? So it doesn't have to happen all at once. It can be a process that happens over time, but the concentration, if not dealt with, can become a risk. So if all of your value is tied up in one asset, whether it's a business or if you don't have a business, it could be a piece of real estate or a specific stock or sector that you really like. But in the case of an owner operator, it's one person, and that person and by connection, their family is really exposed if something doesn't go according to plan. And so it's something that business owners should be mindful of to start addressing today? Again, like I said earlier, it doesn't need to be an immediate change right now, but something you can structurally work into over time.
Yeah, a lot of times we've run this situation, as you well know, where the business owner's focus is on building a business, making sure that things are taken care of both on a daily and a longer term basis, but they kind of neglect to some degree that concentration risk exists. And that's a real risk on the personal side, whether it's for your family or whatever the case may be. So it's better to start having discussions early about what's succession look like? What happens if something happens to me as the primary business owner? And those are hard decisions for a business owner to take a look at. A lot of business owners put that off, and that's understandable, but it's important that you have a succession plan, that you're planning for the future and what that picture looks like if you have a sudden shock, something happens to you health-wise, and what's that mean for your family? Those are all issues you need to plan for ahead of time.
Yeah, bringing it back to a point we were talking about a minute ago, which is one of the challenges most owners have is they're getting advice on one area, but it's not the whole picture. So there's a CPA who knows the taxes, there's an attorney who helped them drop the business documents, maybe the estate documents, probably a different attorney, and maybe they've got a financial advisor that's managing the portfolio, but none of them are talking to each other, or none of them are in the same room, right? To put an analogy around it. So, Dad, what do you think gets missed in that structure, in the spaces between the different advisors?
I think it's the coordination. I mean, a lot of advisors manage assets. That's good. That's obviously a primary function of most advisors. But I think the best advisors are the ones that not only do that, but coordinate what that all looks like, meaning have conversations, get a pipeline of communications between the CPA, your tax people, your attorney, your estate planner. What's that all look like? Is it all in place? Is it where it should be? Not only today, but what's it going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years? What's your plan for the business? Are you thinking probably in 5 to 10 years, I may exit at some form? Is the financial plan, is your attorney, your tax documents, your estate planning, is that all being communicated together with one quarterback that can help advise you with regard to how to structure that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And diving into maybe a moment in time that a lot of these business owners deal with is that transition time frame, and that could look very different depending on the business owner, the situation, et cetera. Some people think I built this business and the pathway is I have to sell it. I have to sell all of it, then I walk away and I go into retirement. The reality is the world's evolved and times have changed. And so we'll talk about this in a minute, but I think what a lot of business owners don't realize is that there are other options. But again, talking about that transition moment. So at that time, these owners, they're getting calls from all kinds of different sources, right? Business buyers, business brokers. You're getting calls maybe from competitors, unsolicited interest. And that naturally puts some sort of pressure on owners, right? Like selling is the answer that you're supposed to want. And I understand that feeling because, listen, but as business owners in Cottonwood, we see that all the time as owners and dealing with our clients. Let's kind of run through an example. So we've got an owner, he or she's 20 years in, they're getting those calls, not sure what they actually want, but they're feeling that pressure. So Dad, what do you hear underneath that pressure in those questions?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, one, obviously it's satisfying, right? You built something that somebody else thinks has some sort of value, but a number of questions come into that equation. Do I really love what I'm doing? And do I want to really exit completely? Right? Those are serious questions you need to ask yourself. And another part of that equation is, what value is my business worth? Is this offer really full value? Do I really want to sell completely and get out? There are so many different options now in the marketplace. They call them sell and stay. You can bring on a strategic partner that maybe you need to help grow the business to some degree, but you want to stay actively involved. You need a person, a team that can help you kind of maneuver through what the best option is for you. And by the way, it may be option A is good for the next 5 years, but option B may be, 10 to 15 years out, a complete sell, for example.
Maybe a piece of that maybe doesn't get talked about enough is the value of time. Right? I'll talk about we're talking about the value of the business and the financial piece of it, and what that means and how we properly plan for it. But I think what you're kind of leaning into, and I think is really important for folks, is that value of time. And so if we look at it from that lens, thinking through those options kind of gives you a different perspective where it's like, how can I maximize some of that value of the business or what I want to do with the time by looking at some of those other options?
And again, having these discussions early gives you more optionality. I mentioned that before, and it's always good to have options. And the marketplace is full of options at this point. But again, a lot of owners get kind of caught up in it's either buy, keep, and it's sell or keep, I should say. And those are not the only options available. There are others out there.
And I think, from we think about it from our vantage point, like building Cottonwood into something that runs well beyond any one person, including myself, that's an active, ongoing decision. And I think it's a positive thing when you look at it this way, in the sense that if the business is growing and continuing to evolve, those are natural decision points that we're gonna face. That's a good thing, but certainly not something that happens by default. And I think a lot of owners know that's true for their business, but maybe they just haven't had the time or the right direction. And your point, that somebody looking at it from 30,000 foot view to really think about, how do I have those conversations and how do I think about that?
Yeah, and the option most owners overlook is the one that keeps them most involved, right? They've built the business. Again, they have the relationships. They still have value to the business, right? But a partial sell, maybe you bring on an operating partner. They aren't consolation prizes, right? Because you didn't get a deal done. They're strategic choices to preserve the optionality. And in my experience, the owners who explore those paths often are the ones that end up better placed.
And to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper, because I think it matters. A lot of business owners, when we talk about advisors or people in their corner, a lot of them have a CPA they trust. They, again, like we talked about before, they've got the estate attorney, maybe an M&A advisor. These owners are not totally blind. They're having conversations. They are thinking about it, and they do have some people in their corner. But they hear, when they hear you need a wealth manager, it's typically, I'm gonna engage in somebody after the exit, and that's just kind of the natural instinct. And how would you respond to that?
Yeah, and I think that that's a pretty common thought process. But when we sit down and work with someone, we don't walk in and say, we're going to fire your CPA. We have someone better. We walk in and say, look, let's make sure your CPA, your attorney, your family financial picture are all speaking the same language towards the same goal. That's a different conversation for most clients. Yes, we manage assets, but we go way beyond that. And a good advisor should do that so that all the pieces function together for your total financial picture, not for the next 2 years necessarily, but for the next 5, 10, 15 years. That's an important concept to remember.
Yeah. And I think it kind of speaks again to having those conversations earlier, sooner rather than later. I think, again, that mindset is, well, once I sell the business, I'm going to open up a big account and I'm going to kind of coast off in retirement. That's the point where I would need a wealth manager. And I think that concept is certainly evolving because business owners need guidance and strategy and advice, before the exit, probably even more so.
Exactly.
And there's an important opportunity to align with folks earlier in that stage. But I'd also say, we talk about coordination and bringing all the pieces together, and that's certainly important at a high level. But when we get down, having a process is crucial, because as we're talking about, the business is personal. You built it, you're running it, you're growing it. And as the business evolves and your personal lives evolve, right? We've all got kids, they're all growing. We have spouses and significant others. There's things we want to do in life. And so that all those things naturally bring in more complexity to your financial strategy. We don't want to miss important pieces. We want to make sure they're organized. We want to make sure that you're checking the right boxes and doing the right things on an ongoing basis, pre-sell, pre-retirement, whatever the case is. Because I think one kind of misnomer that's real pervasive, especially with business owners, is, well, once I sell the business, I just get to coast and things are going to be easy and the plans are going to be simple and I'm just going to have a big account and coast off in retirement. Sure, I mean, we can, there's ways you can certainly set that up, but the work doesn't stop when you sell the business. If anything, it amplifies, because
Agreed.
There's still the tax component.
Right.
The structure component, as you mentioned, we have LLCs, we have S corps, we now have family limited partnerships, likely going to have trusts involved. So how does the money flow into the trust? How are we thinking about taxes into the trust? And how are we investing within those entities to maximize the opportunity, but also protect what's been created from building your assets and your financial strategy through the growth of the business. So anyway, again, I go back to it. It's really important to engage early. It's really important to think about what that's going to look like, because, the strategy, the plan is going to continue to evolve and need to be actively managed after you sell the business or whatever option you decide to take.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, our experience has been that, the business owners we've had that sold their business. I mean, one of the common comments is, look, I don't want to ever have to go back to work again. So make sure I'm taken care of. And that's part of having those conversations early.
Yeah. Just as an example of a younger family that we've seen who's in the father's a business, owns a part of a business. The business is doing great. It's continuing to grow. But one of the conversations we had with him, he said, look, I have full faith that this business is going to do really, really well. But what I don't want to have to do is rely on an event in that business to take care of my family and build the estate that we want to build. And so the benefit to him and his family was, their parents are in their 40s, kids are, between 10 and 13 years old. They took the initiative to engage early and set the foundations for the plan, put the right pieces in place. And the reality as they sit today is they don't need an event in the business to have a successful retirement, cover the kids' education, and leave the estate. And it wasn't by doing anything magical in terms of, very aggressive investments or complicated tax strategies. It was just laying a good foundation. And now the way that their plan's situated, if something happens with the business, it's icing on the cake for them, but they don't need that event. Yeah. And I think, again, that just speaks to the power of setting those foundations in place as early as you can, because it just gives you more optionality. And at the end of the day, more comfort to know that, look, no matter what happens with this, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, that's a good example. Another example, we had the relationship with brother and sister business, family-owned business, three or four generations, I think, old, but we'd had the relationship with the individuals and the business for, 20, 30 years maybe. And they got an unsolicited offer, an outright purchase of the business and real estate holdings. And it was just that the offer was too good to pass up. But they were somewhat unprepared with regard to what that meant for them personally. So we immediately jumped on the board, brought in their CPA to work out the situation with regard to where proceeds from the sale of the business should flow through and then flow to the brother and sister. Also did some updates with regard to estate planning and what the tax implications of all that would mean. We ended up looking at bringing in an insurance expert to do some life insurance planning for estate tax issues that may crop up later on for their heirs. And that included, by the way, some long-term care policies as well. So there are a lot of issues that, again, planning is great and the earlier the better, but we have a process to work through those kinds of situations.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And just to add to that, that family's now living successfully in retirement. But interestingly enough, some of the entities that we established with them when they sold the business, some of them have retained, a lot of them have changed, some of the components of the plan have shifted. And so, again, as we mentioned earlier, that the work doesn't stop just because you sell the business. And yes, it's a different chapter and they're doing it successfully. And as a investment management financial planning firm, that's what we ultimately want. And so we're constantly adjusting the knobs and shifting things to make sure that we're maximizing the tax benefits, maximizing the investment opportunities, to maintain this into perpetuity.
Exactly. Again, they don't want to go back to work, right?
Yeah. So if someone listening to us today hears their own situation somewhere in the conversation, whether they're a business owner trying to figure out what's next, or their family just trying to get a clear picture of where things stand. Dad, what's one thing that you'd want them to take away from this?
I'd say that the clients we've had the most success with and the most impact with were the ones who decided to stop managing it alone and bring in somebody to sit at the table with them before the decisions had to be made. That choice made early enough really changes everything so that they can say, look, I've got this covered for the next 5 to 10 years. I don't have to worry about that. Some of those issues may be college education. Maybe it's I want to have a retirement home somewhere, whatever the case may be. But the earlier those conversations start, the better the plan functions.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it's to your point, it's never too early. I would also add it's never too late.
Right.
To start that process. And, the challenge that we all deal with is that we're getting noise from all kinds of different sources now. There's AI platforms that are providing advice, structures are changing with the way people work. They're getting stock options. They're getting access to different things. They're hearing a lot of different guidance from a lot of different resources. And by the way, not all of it's bad, but I think the challenge is it's confusing and confusion leads to an action. regardless of where you are in your situation, whether you're a younger family, you're a business owner, you're part of a growing business, you're just trying to get a clearer picture. What I can tell you is that the fundamentals really haven't changed. The components are different, but the fundamentals and the principles haven't really changed. And you do have the ability to get a clear picture of how everything is situated and how you need to be thinking about them to put you in the driver's seat. Because at the end of the day, like from Cottonwood's seat, look, we're guiding folks, and we have, we're fortunate to be able to work with the families that we do for as long as we have, but we're really the guide. They're the ones in the driver's seat. Even in today's world of all these different things and noises surrounding us, you still have the ability to have a clear picture, understand what you need to do, put a plan in place, and feel confident that you're gonna hit your marks and have a successful retirement. Patients accounts are going to be paid. You have a pathway for the business that you've built and grown over the years, that we've got an idea on what that's going to look like. And so it's available. And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah, I think it's removing that anxiety. Again, business owners, whether they opt to sell or stay in and continue to work at the process, it's removing that anxiety of knowing, look, I got the long term covered. I know where I stand. I don't need to worry about what the market's doing every day or every week or every month. It's not going to affect my long-term plan.
Yeah. Well, I hope this was valuable for folks. Some of the takeaways are you have options, you have solutions out there. It doesn't need to be complicated, but you've got to take the first step to say, okay, how do I capture everything that's going on in my picture so I can understand it, create an action plan, whether it's week to week, month to month, year over year. All those are going to align, and you have a solid direction to go forward and have success in the goal that you want to have. So, Dad, thanks for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Pocket Pundits, and we'll see you next time.